The silence in the penthouse wasn't peaceful. It was the suffocating quiet of a life being erased before it even ended. Silas stood frozen as the divorce papers slid across the marble table, not from a stranger, but from the woman he had built his entire world around, while another man's expensive cologne lingered heavily in the air. It wasn't just a breakup. It was a calculated demolition of his existence, executed with a terrifyingly cold smile. If you are drawn to stories where the quietest men build the loudest empires from the ashes of betrayal, stay with me. This journey of vengeance is best served cold, and I'd hate for you to miss the moment the tables finally turn. The winter wind in Chicago had a way of cutting through even the thickest coats, but tonight, the chill inside Silas Vance's apartment was far worse. Silas stood in the entryway, his hands still stained with the delicate oil he used for restoring vintage timepieces. He had come home early to surprise Lydia for her birthday, a modest gift, a restored locket from the 1920s, resting heavily in his pocket. But the scene before him wasn't a celebration. The living room was brightly lit. 2 uniformed police officers stood by the fireplace. On the leather sofa sat Lydia, her face buried in her hands, and standing protectively beside her, with a hand on her shoulder, was Adrian Pierce. Adrian, the venture capitalist who had been mentoring Lydia on her career path. The man whose Porsche had been parked outside their building far too often lately. Mr. Vance, one of the officers stepped forward, his tone professional but accusing. We have a report of grand larceny filed against you. Silas blinked, the fatigue of a 12-hour shift instantly replaced by adrenaline. Larceny? I don't understand. Adrian stepped forward, his suit impeccably tailored, a sharp contrast to Silas's worn work clothes. His expression was a mask of disappointed authority. The Patek Philippe gears, Silas, Adrian said smoothly. The prototype movement I entrusted to you for restoration. It's missing. And the insurance investigators found a transfer of $50,000 into an account under your name this morning. The exact black market value of those parts. Silas looked at Lydia. She finally raised her head. Her eyes were red, but dry. She didn't look at him. She looked through him. Tell them it's a mistake, Lydia, Silas said, his voice trembling slightly. You know I never touch the accounts. You manage everything. I found the transfer record on your laptop. Silas, Lydia said, her voice steady, cold, rehearsed. I didn't want to believe it, but Adrian, he threatened to press charges unless what? Silas asked, realizing the trap had snapped shut before he even walked in the door. Adrian slid a document across the coffee table. It wasn't a police report. It was a divorce settlement. Lydia is heartbroken. Silas, Adrian said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as the officers watched from a distance. She can't be married to a thief. But I'm a generous man. Sign the papers. Give her the apartment, the car, and leave tonight. If you do, I'll tell the officers it was a misunderstanding, a misplacement of inventory. No jail time, no felony record. Silas looked at the papers. Then he looked at his wife. He saw the slight tightening of her jaw, the way she leaned imperceptibly toward Adrian. It wasn't fear in her eyes. It was impatience. She wanted him gone. She wanted the penthouse they had bought together, but she wanted the man with the Porsche to fill it. The betrayal was so absolute, so mechanically precise, that it almost impressed him, like a watch movement designed to stop a heart. You framed me, Silas whispered. It wasn't a question. I'm saving you, Lydia replied, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were like ice. You were never going to make it in this city, Silas. You're too slow, too small. Take the deal. Go back to wherever you came from. Silas reached into his pocket. His fingers brushed the silver locket. He withdrew his hand, empty. He wouldn't give her that last piece of himself. He walked to the table, picked up the pen, and signed his name. Silas Vance. The gears, Silas said softly as he put the pen down, looking directly at Adrian. The mainspring you claimed I stole? It requires a specific lubricant. If you don't use it, the whole mechanism shatters within a week. I'll worry about the watch, Adrian sneered, picking up the papers. Get out. Silas turned and walked out the door. He didn't take a coat. He didn't take a bag. As he stepped into the elevator, leaving the warmth of the life he thought he knew, the doors closed on Lydia and Adrian clinking crystal glasses. Outside, the Chicago snow was falling thick and fast. Silas Vance vanished into the whiteout, a ghost in his own city. Chicago died in the rearview mirror of a Greyhound bus, but the cold stayed in Silas's bones for months. He didn't stop until the snow turned to the red dust of Nevada. He had no destination, only a desperate need to put miles between himself and the signature that had ended his life. For the first year, Silas Vance ceased to exist. In his place was just C, a quiet mechanic in a roadside garage off Route 50, the kind of place where truckers stopped only when their engines gave out. He lived in a rusted trailer behind the shop, sleeping on a mattress that smelled of diesel and stale tobacco. His hands, once celebrated for handling 18th century escapements with the delicacy of a surgeon, were now perpetually stained with heavy grease and scarred by stubborn lug nuts. The physical labor was brutal, numbing the mind, which was exactly what he wanted. He didn't want to think about Lydia. He didn't want to imagine her in the penthouse, perhaps wearing the pearls he had bought her, laughing with Adrian. But the nights were the hardest. Insomnia was a cruel companion. To keep from going mad, Silas returned to the only language he truly spoke: mechanics. Under the flickering light of a single bulb in his trailer, he didn't fix carburetors. He drew. He used the back of invoices, napkins, and brown paper bags. He sketched movements that didn't exist yet, mechanisms that defied traditional horology. He poured his rage into geometry. The designs were no longer soft or decorative like the antiques he used to restore. They were sharp, aggressive, and industrial. They were beautiful in a terrifying, absolute way. One scorching Tuesday afternoon, a matte black sedan limped into the garage lot. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, looking alien against the backdrop of cracked asphalt and tumbleweeds. Smoke poured from under the hood. The driver, a frantic young man in a chauffeur's uniform, popped the hood. "We have a meeting in San Francisco in 6 hours. You have to fix this." The garage owner, a man named Buck who knew hammers better than computers, scratched his head. "Electronic fuel injections shot. Needs a dealership tool. Take 2 days to get the part." The rear window rolled down. An older man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to have seen everything sat in the back. He looked at his watch, a Vacheron Constantine, and frowned. Silas wiped his hands on a rag and stepped forward. "It's not the injection," he said quietly. "It's the timing chain tensioner. It slipped. I can hear the rhythm. It's off by a fraction of a second." Buck scoffed, but the man in the back seat narrowed his eyes. "Let him look." Silas worked for 2 hours straight. He didn't have the computerized diagnostics. He didn't need them. He felt the engine the way he felt the heartbeat of a clock. He improvised a shim from a piece of scrap metal, recalibrating the tension manually. When he turned the key, the V12 engine purred to life, smooth as silk. As he wiped the oil from his face, the older man stepped out of the car. He wasn't looking at the engine. He was looking at the workbench where Silas had carelessly left his lunch, and a stack of napkins covered in sketches. The stranger picked up a napkin. It was a design for a tourbillon cage, floating in a magnetic field, unlike anything currently on the market. "You didn't go to trade school to fix radiators, did you?" the man asked, his voice low. "I fix what's broken," Silas replied, reaching to take the drawing back. "That's all." "My name is Harrison Blackwood," the man said, ignoring the gesture. He extended a hand that was manicured yet firm. "I run a venture capital firm in Palo Alto. I invest in impossible things. This," he tapped the grease-stained napkin. This is impossible. It's just a drawing. It's a revolution, Blackwood corrected. He looked Silas up and down, taking in the poverty, the grease, the hollowness in his eyes. You have a look of a man who has lost everything. That's good. Men with nothing to lose are dangerous. They work harder. Blackwood pulled a business card from his pocket and wrote a personal number on the back. I need a chief technical officer for a new luxury division. I don't care about your resume. I care about your hands and what's in your head. If you want to rot in this desert, that's your choice. If you want to build an empire that makes the people who hurt you look like ants, call me. The Rolls-Royce drove away, kicking up a cloud of red dust. Silas stood there for a long time, the card burning a hole in his palm. He looked at the trailer, then at the horizon where the sun was setting, painting the sky the color of a bruise. He didn't call Lydia. He didn't check on his past. He walked to the payphone by the road, dropped a quarter in, and dialed. The exile was over. The war was about to begin. 6 years later, San Francisco was a city of ghosts and gold, wrapped in a perpetual blanket of fog. High above the financial district, on the 45th floor of the Blackwood Tower, the air was filtered, scented faintly with cedar and ozone. Silas Vance stood before a wall of glass, looking down at the city lights bleeding through the mist. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than the entire workshop he had once owned in Chicago. His hair was cut short, military style, accentuating the sharp angles of a face that had lost all its softness. The hesitation that used to plague his speech was gone, replaced by a silence so heavy it made his employees nervous to breathe too loudly. In his hand he held the Chronos 1. It wasn't just a watch. It was a masterpiece of kinetic engineering. The casing was forged from a meteorite alloy, dark and brooding, and the face had no numbers, only the rhythmic, hypnotic pulse of a tourbillon that floated in a magnetic suspension. It was a device that didn't just tell time. It seemed to judge how you spent it. The pre-orders are capped at 500 units, sir, his assistant, a sharp young woman named Elena, said from the doorway. She didn't dare step fully onto the Persian rug. The waitlist is already 3 years long. The tech blogs are calling it the Ghost Watch. They say you can't buy it, you have to be chosen. Silas didn't turn around. He rubbed his thumb over the sapphire crystal. Open it to 600, but double the price for the last 100. Make them bleed for it. Yes, sir. And the acquisition target? The failing venture capital firm in Chicago. We've acquired 40% of their debt through shell corporations. We are the majority creditor. Good, Silas said, his voice devoid of satisfaction, merely stating a fact. Let them sweat a little longer. 2,000 miles away, in a sprawling estate in the suburbs of Chicago, Lydia Pierce stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror. The diamond necklace around her neck felt like a noose. She was waiting for Adrian. She was always waiting for Adrian. The years had been kind to her face but cruel to her eyes. They held a perpetual anxiety now. The life she had stolen from Silas, the wealth, the status, the parties, had turned into a gilded prison. Adrian wasn't the charming savior she thought he was. He was a gambler, both with money and women. The front door slammed downstairs. Lydia stiffened. She checked her makeup one last time, plastering on the smile of a supportive wife, and walked out to the landing. Adrian was in the foyer, loosening his tie with a violent jerk. He smelled of scotch and expensive perfume that wasn't hers. You're late, Lydia said softly. The dinner with the senators. Cancel it, Adrian snapped, not even looking at her as he marched toward his study. I don't have time for social hour, Lydia. The fund is bleeding. Lydia followed him, stopping at the doorway of his study. Is it bad? Adrian poured himself a drink, his hand shaking slightly. It's catastrophic. Our tech portfolio tanked. We need a miracle. A partnership with a unicorn company, something exclusive to drive the stock price back up. He turned to her, his eyes wild with stress and ambition. Have you heard of Vance Kronos? Lydia frowned. The name sounded vaguely familiar but also foreign. The luxury watchmaker in Silicon Valley? The one everyone is talking about? It's not just watches, Lydia. It's wearable tech disguised as art. They are the hottest company on the West Coast right now. Their CEO is a ghost. No photos, no interviews. But rumor has it he's looking for a financial partner to handle global distribution. Adrian took a gulp of the scotch. If I can land a meeting with him, if I can secure that contract, we are saved. We'll be richer than we ever imagined. Lydia felt a strange chill crawl up her spine, unrelated to the draft in the hallway. And if you don't, then we lose this house, Adrian said brutally. We lose everything. He looked at her then, really looked at her, assessing her like an asset. I need you to book a flight to San Francisco. Use your contacts in PR. Find out who this guy is. Get us into his launch gala next week. Charm him. Do whatever you have to do. Adrian. She whispered. I'm your wife, not your bait. You're my partner, he corrected, his voice hardening. You did what was necessary to get us here, remember? With your ex. Don't grow a conscience now, darling. It doesn't suit you. Lydia went silent. The memory of Silas, his quiet hands, his trusting eyes, flashed in her mind, a ghost she thought she had exorcised. She looked at the man she had destroyed him for, and she felt nothing but a hollow ache. Fine, Lydia said, her voice barely audible. I'll get us the meeting. Back in San Francisco, Silas placed the Kronos one into a velvet-lined box. He snapped the lid shut. The sound was sharp like a trap closing. He walked to the window and looked east, toward where the sun would rise, toward Chicago. Come and find me, he whispered to the glass. The invitation arrived at Adrian's firm in a matte black envelope, heavy and devoid of stamps. Inside, there was a single card embossed with silver lettering, inviting representatives of Pierce Capital to a private viewing at the Obsidian Gallery in San Francisco. It was signed only by the office of the CEO, Vance Kronos. Silas sat at his mahogany desk, watching the digital confirmation appear on his secure tablet. Accepted. They booked the last flight out of O'Hare tonight, Elena reported, standing by the door with her tablet pressed to her chest. Mr. Pierce and his wife. They are staying at the St. Regis. Did you brief the security team? Silas asked, his voice low, vibrating with a calm that was more unsettling than anger. Yes, sir. No photos. No press. Phones are to be confiscated at the door. We've told them the CEO values privacy above all else. Elena paused, adjusting her glasses. Mr. Vance, based on their financial records, Pierce Capital is desperate. They are leveraging their last liquid assets just to make this trip. If you decline the partnership after this, I haven't decided if I will decline, Silas said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He walked to the window, staring at the fog rolling over the Golden Gate Bridge. Sometimes the worst punishment isn't rejection. It's giving someone exactly what they think they want. 3 hours later, in the penthouse suite of the St. Regis San Francisco, the air was thick with tension. Lydia stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, smoothing the fabric of a midnight blue evening gown. It was elegant, cut low in the back, a dress bought specifically to distract and charm. But looking at her reflection, she didn't feel beautiful. She felt like a soldier putting on armor for a war she didn't believe in. Stop fidgeting, Adrian snapped from the wet bar. He was already on his second scotch, pacing the room like a caged animal. You look fine. I look expensive, Lydia corrected, turning to face him. There's a difference. Adrian slammed his glass down. Don't start with the moral high ground, Lydia. Not tonight. Do you know how many strings I had to pull to get this invite? This CEO, this ghost, he's the most elusive man in the industry. If we secure the distribution rights for his wearable tech, we clear our debt in 6 months. If we don't, the bank takes the house in Chicago by Christmas. He walked over to her, gripping her bare shoulders. His hands were cold. "You're the marketing director. Sell it. Sell us. Use that charm that worked so well on me when you were tired of your mechanic husband." Lydia flinched. The mention of Silas was a deliberate cruelty. "I'm studying the brand profile," she said, stepping away from his touch. "Vance Kronos isn't like normal luxury brands. Severe. Minimalist. There's a philosophy behind it about time being a finite resource. It feels personal." She picked up the glossy lookbook on the coffee table. The images of the watches were dark, industrial, and hauntingly precise. There was something about the curvature of the gears, the obsession with perfect tension, that tugged at a memory in the back of her mind. A memory of late nights, the smell of oil, and a man hunched over a workbench with a magnifying glass. But she dismissed it immediately. Silas fixed old things. This was cutting-edge futuristic design. Silas was soft. This brand was sharp edges and steel. "It doesn't matter what the philosophy is," Adrian said, checking his reflection in the mirror and straightening his tie. "Money is the universal language. We go in there, we dazzle him, we sign the deal. And if he refuses, he won't refuse you." Adrian sneered, a smile that didn't reach his eyes appearing on his face. "You have a way of making men give up everything for you, don't you?" Lydia grabbed her clutch, her knuckles turning white. She hated him. She hated herself more for staying. But the fear of poverty, of losing the social standing she had sacrificed her integrity for, kept her silent. "Let's go," she said, her voice hollow. A black car waited for them downstairs. As they drove through the winding streets of San Francisco toward the Obsidian Gallery, the fog grew thicker, swallowing the city lights. Lydia looked out the window, a strange sense of dread settling in her stomach. It felt like gravity was shifting, pulling them toward a center of mass they couldn't see. She didn't know that high above the city, in the shadows of the gallery, the architect of her past and future was checking his watch, waiting for the exact second the trap would spring. The Obsidian Gallery was less a building and more a fortress of glass and dark concrete, jutting out from the cliffside like a jagged tooth. Inside, the temperature was kept at a precise 68 degrees, perfect for preserving mechanical movements, chilling for anyone wearing an evening gown. Lydia shivered as she stepped into the atrium. A security officer, silent and imposing, collected their phones and locked them in a magnetic pouch. "Standard protocol," the officer murmured. "The CO values discretion." Adrian adjusted his cufflinks, visibly annoyed but compliant. "Dramatic," he whispered to Lydia as they were escorted toward the private elevator. "These tech types love their theater. Just remember, smile, agree, and get him to sign." The elevator ride was smooth and soundless. When the doors slid open, they weren't met by a bustling office, but a vast, dimly lit sanctuary. In the center of the room, illuminated by a single spotlight, a watch movement floated inside a glass column. It was the size of a dinner plate, its gears turning in a mesmerizing, silent dance. "Mr. and Mrs. Pierce," a voice echoed from the far end of the room. It wasn't the assistant. It was deep, resonant, and disturbingly familiar. Lydia's breath hitched in her throat. A high-backed leather chair faced the panoramic window overlooking the bay. Slowly, deliberately, the chair swiveled around. The man sitting there wore a navy three-piece suit that fit him like a second skin. His hands were clasped on the table, hands that were manicured, steady, and devoid of the motor oil that used to stain them permanently. But Lydia knew the shape of those fingers. She knew the scar on the left thumb from a slip with a chisel years ago. Adrian stepped forward, his smile practiced and eager. "Mr. Vance? Is it? It's an honor. I'm Adrian Pierce, and this is my wife, Lydia. We've heard incredible things about your—" Adrian stopped. He frowned, his eyes narrowing as he finally looked at the man's face. The smile faltered. Confusion flickered across his features. Silas didn't stand up. He didn't offer a hand. He simply leaned back, his eyes dark and unreadable, fixed solely on Lydia. "Hello, Lydia," Silas said. His voice was soft, devoid of anger, which made it infinitely more terrifying. Lydia felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her lightheaded. Her knees wobbled, and she instinctively reached for the back of a chair to steady herself. The room seemed to tilt. "Silas?" she whispered. The name came out as a strangled gasp. "You know him?" Adrian looked between them, the pieces of the puzzle crashing together in his mind clumsily. "Wait, Silas? The mechanic? He choked on the word thief. "The founder," Silas corrected calmly. He stood up then, and the room seemed to shrink. He was taller than they remembered, or perhaps it was just the way he held himself, like a king looking down at peasants who had stumbled into his court. He walked around the heavy oak desk, the sound of his Italian leather shoes sharp against the polished concrete floor. He stopped 3 feet from them, close enough for Lydia to smell the scent of sandalwood and cold rain that clung to him. "You look expensive, Lydia," Silas said, his gaze sweeping over her designer dress and the diamond necklace. "It suits you. Much better than the apron you wore when you packed my things into garbage bags." "This is impossible," Adrian stammered, his arrogance evaporating into panic. You were a nobody. You fix clocks in a garage. "And you were a visionary investor," Silas replied, turning his gaze to Adrian. The look was physical in its intensity. "Now, I hear you're just a man with a liquidity problem and a failing portfolio." Silas raised his wrist. The Kronos 1 glinted in the low light, a masterpiece of engineering worth more than Adrian's entire firm. "You came here for a lifeline," Silas said, walking back to his desk and sitting on the edge of it, crossing his arms. "You wanted to meet the man who could save your reputation. Well, here I am. The man you framed. The man you robbed. The man you threw out into the snow." Lydia finally found her voice, though it was thin and brittle. "Silas, please. We didn't know." "Didn't know?" Silas interrupted, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You didn't know I would survive? Or you didn't know that time is a circle, and eventually the hands always come back to where they started?" He picked up a black folder from his desk and tossed it toward them. It slid across the surface, stopping right at Adrian's fingertips. "The proposal for the partnership," Silas said. "Read it. But be warned, the terms have changed since you walked through that door." Lydia looked at the folder, then at Silas. She saw no mercy in his eyes. She realized with a sinking heart that the boy who used to make her coffee and fix her jewelry was dead. The man in front of her was a stranger, and he held their lives in his hands. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the sound of Adrian turning the pages of the contract. His hands were shaking, the paper rattling softly, betraying the desperation he tried so hard to hide beneath his tailored suit. Lydia stood frozen near the glass wall, her back to the view of the bay. She couldn't take her eyes off Silas. He had returned to his chair, watching them with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing insects in a jar. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't yelling. He was simply waiting. "The financial injection is substantial," Adrian muttered, his eyes scanning the figures. "This covers our debt servicing and funds the new rollout. It's generous. Surprisingly generous." "I value efficiency," Silas said, his voice flat. "But you haven't read the addendum. Page 12. Clause 14. Adrian flipped the pages rapidly. He squinted at the text, then frowned. He looked up at Silas, then over at Lydia, then back at the paper. "The partnership is contingent upon a 3-month probation period," Adrian read aloud, his voice wavering, "during which a representative from Pierce Capital must remain on-site at Vance Kronos headquarters to oversee brand integration. This representative must be the director of marketing, Lydia Pierce." Lydia stepped forward, her voice sharp. "What? No, I can't stay here. My life is in Chicago. Your life is wherever the company needs you to be, isn't it?" Silas interjected smoothly. He didn't look at Lydia. He kept his eyes locked on Adrian. Those are the terms. Your firm has a reputation for erratic management. I need assurance that my brand won't be tainted. Lydia knows the history. She knows the aesthetic. I trust her. You trust me? Lydia let out a bitter, incredulous laugh. After everything? I trust you to do exactly what is necessary to survive, Silas corrected. Just like you did 6 years ago. Adrian stood up, wiping sweat from his forehead. Silas, Mr. Vance. Surely we can send a junior executive? Having Lydia here for 3 months. It's irregular. Irregular is my business model, Silas said. He leaned forward, clasping his hands. Take the deal, Adrian. Or walk out. But if you walk out, you know exactly what happens on Monday morning when the markets open. Your creditors call in the loans. You lose the house. You lose the cars. You lose the status. He let the words hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. And there is one more thing, Silas added. To ensure full compliance, I require collateral. Your personal equity in Pierce Capital. All of it. If Lydia quits or if you breach the contract, I absorb your company. Hostile takeover. Lydia looked at her husband. She expected him to be outraged. She expected him to tear up the contract and take her hand, leading her out of this room with her dignity intact. She waited for him to defend her. Instead, she saw Adrian doing the math. She saw the moment the calculation finished in his eyes. He looked at the contract, then at the pen, and finally, briefly, at her. It wasn't a look of love. It was an apology for a transaction already made. 3 months isn't that long, Lydia, Adrian said softly. The air left Lydia's lungs. Felt like a physical blow. You're selling me, she whispered. To him. I'm saving us. Adrian hissed, his voice rising in panic. It's a job, Lydia. Just a job. You stay here in a hotel, you attend a few meetings, and we walk away with $5 million in funding. Don't be selfish. Selfish? Lydia repeated, tears stinging her eyes. Sign it, Silas commanded. His voice cut through their argument like a blade. Adrian didn't hesitate anymore. He picked up the fountain pen, a heavy, black instrument that looked like a weapon, and scrawled his signature. He pushed the papers toward Silas, looking relieved, looking weak. Done, Adrian exhaled. When does the transfer happen? Funds will be available in 48 hours, Silas said, closing the folder. You can return to Chicago, Adrian. Lydia starts tomorrow at 8 a.m. sharp. Adrian nodded, avoiding his wife's gaze. Right. Good. I'll send for your things, Lydia. Silas stood up and walked to the window, turning his back on them. Show them out, Elena. As the security guard escorted them toward the elevator, Lydia looked back one last time. Silas was standing exactly where he had been when she first betrayed him years ago. Alone, silent, and watching. But this time, she was the one leaving with nothing, and he was the one holding the keys to her cage. Adrian had signed the paper, but Silas owned the pen. For 30 days, Lydia lived inside the machine that Silas had built. Working at Vance Kronos was like living inside one of his watches. Silent, precise, and intolerant of error. She watched him from across the open-plan executive suite. He wasn't the tyrant she expected. He was a force of nature. He worked 18-hour days, obsessing over microns and milliseconds, leading with a quiet authority that commanded absolute loyalty from his staff. Loyalty Adrian had never known how to earn. It was on a Tuesday afternoon that the illusion of her marriage finally dissolved completely. Silas summoned her to his office. The blinds were drawn, casting long shadows across the room. On the wall-mounted screen, a complex web of financial transactions glowed in neon blue. Sit down, Silas said. He didn't look up from his tablet. Lydia sat, smoothing her skirt, her nerves frayed. Is this about the marketing rollout for the Q3 line? I have the drafts ready. It's about the $5 million I transferred to Pierce Capital, Silas replied. He tapped a key, and the screen shifted. It's gone. Lydia frowned. That's impossible. That money was for the distribution network. Adrian said he was securing warehouses in Europe. Adrian lied. Silas stood up and walked to the screen. He pointed to a series of transfers. Shell companies in the Caymans. Consulting fees paid to an entity registered to a 22-year-old model in Miami. And gambling debts settled in Vegas. He burned through the capital in 3 weeks. Lydia felt the room spin. The nausea that hit her was violent. She stared at the numbers. The undeniable proof of her husband's stupidity and infidelity. He stole it, she whispered. And he's blaming you, Silas said. Before she could process the words, the intercom buzzed. Mr. Pierce is on line 1, sir. He sounds agitated. Silas pressed the speaker button. Adrian's voice filled the room, tinny and panicked, but laced with a sickening false bravado. Silas, glad I caught you. Look, we have a problem. I've just been reviewing the accounts and it looks like there's been some mismanagement on the San Francisco end. Lydia froze. She recognized the tone. It was the same tone he had used 6 years ago when he told the police about the missing watch parts. Mismanagement? Silas repeated, his voice dangerously calm. Yes, Adrian continued, gaining confidence. Lydia has been distracted. I think the pressure of the job got to her. She authorized some transfers that were unauthorized. I'm doing my best to contain it, but I might need to terminate her position to protect our partnership. I can fly out there and take over personally. Lydia stood up, her hands trembling. He was doing it again. He was framing her to save himself. He was going to sacrifice her to Silas to cover his own theft. You coward, she screamed at the speakerphone. You lying, pathetic coward. There was a silence on the other end. Lydia, I didn't know you were in the room. She is, Silas said, stepping closer to the phone. And unlike you, Adrian, I don't operate on hearsay. I operate on data. Silas tapped the screen again. I attached a forensic tracking algorithm to the funds I sent you. I know exactly where every cent went. I know about the condo in Miami. I know about the debts. And I know you just attempted to frame your wife for corporate embezzlement. Again. Silas, wait, let's be reasonable, Adrian stammered. Clause 14, Section B. Silas cut him off. Any misuse of funds or breach of fiduciary duty results in the immediate forfeiture of collateral. No, Adrian gasped. You can't. You pledged your equity, Adrian. All of it. As of 2 minutes ago, I triggered the hostile takeover clause. Pierce Capital is now a subsidiary of Vance Kronos. Your board of directors has already been notified. You are no longer the CEO. You are trespassing in my building. Silas, please, this is my life. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises before security escorts you out. Silas said, his voice cold as the grave. And Adrian, the police in Chicago have been forwarded the transaction logs. I imagine they'll be very interested in your creative accounting. Silas cut the line. The silence that followed was absolute. Lydia stood there, tears streaming down her face. Not for Adrian, but for the sheer brutality of the justice she had just witnessed. Silas hadn't just defeated him, he had erased him. She looked at Silas, expecting triumph. But he just looked tired. He walked back to his desk and picked up a file. You're free, Lydia, he said, not looking at her. The company is mine. Adrian is finished. Your debt is paid. Lydia realized then, with a breaking heart, that he hadn't done this to win her back. He had done it to balance the books. To him, she was just another broken mechanism he had finally fixed, so he could put her back in the box and move on. The wind on the roof of the Blackwood Tower was fierce enough to tear the words right out of a person's throat. Above, the blades of a sleek, black helicopter began to rotate, slicing through the heavy San Francisco fog with a rhythmic, deafening beat. Lydia stood near the access door, clutching a cardboard box containing the few personal items she had accumulated over the last 3 months. She watched Silas button his trench coat, his back to her, preparing to leave for a summit in Tokyo. He hadn't said goodbye. He had simply signed her release papers and walked out of the office. "Silas!" she shouted over the noise of the rotors. He stopped. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't turn around, that he would just keep walking into his new life and leave her stranded in the wreckage of her old one. But he turned. His expression was impassive, his eyes shielded by dark sunglasses. Lydia ran across the concrete, stopping a few feet away from him. Her hair was whipped across her face, stinging her cheeks. "You saved me," she said, her voice breathless. "You destroyed Adrian, but you kept my name out of the investigation. You paid off the debts that were under my signature." "It was a business decision," Silas replied, his voice calm, carried clearly despite the wind. "A scandal involving my temporary marketing director would have hurt the stock price. It was cleaner this way." "Don't lie to me," Lydia pleaded, stepping closer. "You didn't do it for the stock price. You did it because of what we had. Because you still care." She looked at him, searching for the man who used to make her tea when she was sick. The man who had looked at her with adoration in a dusty workshop in Chicago. She needed him to be there. If he was there, then maybe she hadn't ruined everything. Maybe she could be forgiven. "I made a mistake, Silas," she choked out, the tears finally spilling over. "Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. I was blinded by ambition. I was stupid. But I'm free now. Adrian is gone. We can start over." Silas looked at her. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad. He looked at her the way a stranger looks at a building they used to live in a long time ago, recognizing the structure, but feeling no desire to go inside. He reached into his coat pocket. Lydia's heart leaped. Was it a ring? A key? He pulled out a small, velvet pouch and held it out to her. Lydia took it with trembling hands. She opened it. Inside was the silver locket from the 1920s, the one he had tried to give her on the night she kicked him out. The night she had chosen Adrian. "You left this on the table," Silas said. "I fixed the hinge. It works perfectly now." "Silas, I didn't save you because I love you, Lydia," he said, his voice cutting deep. "I saved you because I don't owe you anything anymore. The man you married? You killed him that night in Chicago. I'm just the guy who survived." "Don't say that," she whispered. "You wanted a man who could give you the world," Silas continued, gesturing to the helicopter, the tower, the city sprawling beneath them. "Well, here it is. But you don't get to share it with me. You chose your timeline, Lydia. I'm just living in mine." He turned away, the movement sharp and final. "Silas, please, where do I go?" She cried out, the desperation clawing at her throat. "What do I do?" Silas paused one last time at the steps of the helicopter. He looked back over his shoulder. "You survive," he said, "just like I did." He climbed into the cabin. The door shut with a solid thud, sealing him inside. The engine roared to life, the downwash forcing Lydia to shield her eyes. She watched as the machine lifted effortlessly into the gray sky, banking sharp and turning toward the ocean. She stood there on the roof, clutching the silver locket, surrounded by the empire he had built and the silence he had left behind. Below her, the city was moving, millions of people rushing through time. But for Lydia, the clock had finally stopped.